My name is Toya Spencer, and for my issue presentation, I am going to discuss working with homeless students. Family homelessness surfaced as a major issue in the United States in the 1980s for the first time since the Great Depression. The rise of homelessness was associated with the shortage of affordable housing, a rise in income inequality, and child poverty. In 1985, the after-tax income of the wealthiest 1% of Americans was almost higher than in 1979. During that time period, there was a tremendous decline in the income of the lowest wage earners, which resulted in child poverty rising from 16% in 1979 to 22% in 1983, with a further increase for those families in the inner cities who had a child poverty rate of 31%. The majority of the homeless families are led by single parents, single women under the age of 30, with young children in particular. Between 1981 and 1986, more families became homeless due to the decrease of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development's budget, which was decreased significantly from $33 billion to less than $10 billion. The drastic decrease led to the decline in affordable housing options for families within the lower socioeconomic spectrum. In 1982, eviction rates rose as much as 800% compared to those of 1981, primarily caused by non-payment of rent. In 2012, family homelessness was as prevalent as it was in 1987. In 1987, the child poverty rate was 21.4%, and in 2011 it was 21.9%. In the 2016-2017 academic school year, more than 111,500 students in the New York City schools were homeless. 104,000 of the reported students were enrolled and attended public schools, and the others attended charter schools. The overall amount of homeless or students in temporary housing for New York State was an estimated 148,000. Homelessness is defined as an individual who lacks housing without regard to whether the individual is a member of a family, including an individual whose primary residence during the night is a supervised public or private facility. Examples: shelters that provide temporary living accommodations, and an individual who is a resident in transitional housing. The New York City Department of Education no longer uses the term homeless, but rather uses the term temporary housing when discussing their students who are affected by this situation. When discussing students in temporary housing, it is not a clear indication that those students live in homeless shelters. Many families who are considered homeless by definition live in a place other than a shelter, such as cars, hotels, or with family members or friends. This is defined as doubling up. In 2016, New York City had a survey conducted by Coalition for the Homeless and discovered the number of students who lived in one of the aforementioned situations rose by nearly 4,400, and the number of students who resided in homeless shelters rose by 1,900. When discussing students in temporary housing, we must address the chaos that is often created in their lives as a result of the instability that is associated with living in temporary housing. For many students, they are often moved from one temporary situation to another, which also results in their school being changed, or sometimes the result is a longer commute in order to remain in the school of origin. During the transitional time, many of the students miss many days of school or are chronically absent. The lack of continual attendance very often results in the students suffering academically. According to an article written in the New York Times, it is documented that for many years after a student resides in permanent housing, they continue to have chronic absenteeism and decreased academic performance. According to the same article, 24% of students who returned to permanent housing continued to be chronically absent during the 2015-2016 academic school year, while their classmates who reside in the homeless shelter system had an average of 62% absenteeism. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan signed the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act of 1987 into law. It is a United States federal law that provides federal money for homeless shelter programs. It was the first significant federal legislative response to homelessness and was passed by the United States Congress and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan on July 22, 1987. The McKinney-Vento Act. The federal McKinney-Vento Act ensures that children and youth experiencing homelessness are able to enroll, attend, and succeed in school. Homeless students must be able to attend and participate fully in all school activities, including after-school athletics, co-curricular activities, and other school-sponsored events. Homelessness can have a major impact on the mental and physical health of the families who are impacted by this crisis. Many children who experience homelessness suffer from lack of security, trust issues, privacy issues, an increased rate of medical infections and conditions, including but not limited to ear infections, respiratory infections, including chronic asthma. Many of these children also suffer with many developmental and educational deficiencies, such as issues with cognitive development, delays in speech and reading, delays in personal, social, and motor development. According to the ASCA Ethical Standard for School Counselors model, it is the role of the school counselor when dealing with students who reside in temporary housing to advocate for the equal rights to free, appropriate public education for all youth, in which students are not stigmatized or isolated based on their housing status, disability, foster care, special education status, mental health, or any other exceptionality or special need. As a school counselor, I would reach out to many support services in the community so that I may be able to provide my students with the resources and information they may need to make their time in temporary housing as minimally stressed as within my power. I would also make sure that I remain sensitive and compassionate to their situations and do all within the scope of my position to conduct information sessions so that other staff members remain culturally sensitive as well.